Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. So The Guardian has dropped a load of articles on leaked documents showing that Boris Johnson has, against all the rules, used his position as Prime Minister, as well as public money, to earn huge profits. I'll be explaining just what the rules are for former ministers, and especially Prime Ministers, how Boris Johnson seems to have broken those rules and definitely lied about it, and what Labour should do with this, because they could make this massive. But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So, Ministerial rules fairly clear that the Prime Minister cannot use their office, public funding or contacts for personal profit, either during or even after they have served their term. Boris Johnson has done the lot. Now, before I go into a few of the details, let's remind ourselves of his fellow Etonian, David Cameron. After leaving Parliament, he triggered a scandal when it turned out he'd used his contacts in the government to get preferential access to his employer, Greensill Capital. The investigations found that Cameron had not broken the rules in this case, but the Treasury report did note that this was not because the former Prime Minister hadn't done anything wrong, but because the rules were too weak. So the reason I mention this is that the new Boris Johnson scandal gives Labour the opportunity to say, the rules need massively beefing up, and that was according to the Treasury under the Conservatives, and it allows them to draw a distinction between the way they are holding themselves to ridiculously high standards, as evidenced by Rayner's resignation, and the Tories are just grubby little bandits. Anyway, on to Boris Johnson. So there's a whole raft of examples of dodgy dealings in the Guardian articles based on leaks of documents from his office. And I'm going to be guessing there's going to be more to come. But let's pick out a couple of good examples. So last February, the Tories were still in government, but Boris Johnson had left Parliament and was out and about earning millions by giving speeches to drunk American businessmen. This is normal for ex-prime ministers, all fine. But he'd also paid a visit to Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro. Not that Johnson had much interest in him, didn't even like him. But there was someone else at the meeting, a hedge fund manager by the name of Martin Peterman. After the meeting, Boris Johnson strenuously denied being paid for the meeting. But detailed in the data leak from Johnson's office, turns out he was paid £250,000. I think the implication is he was paid £200,000 for the meeting itself and another £40,000 for expenses, first class flights, posh hotels, that sort of thing. But how do you call getting so much money not being paid? I wonder if it's because Johnson considers anything less than £1,000,000 pocket change. You know, remember when he was Prime Minister and he complained about the Prime Ministerial salary. He used it to justify why he needed donors to pay for his takeaways and his flat refurbishment and everything. Oh, I can't afford it on my Prime Ministerial salary. He called it chicken feed. It's many times the median average income. Chicken feed. Reminds me of the Jimmy Tarbuck story about Tommy Cooper. He'd been told to stop drinking and smoking to protect his heart, but Tarbuck found him smoking a cigarello and drinking a glass of whiskey. When he asked Cooper about it, the former magician replied, that's not smoking, and took a drink of his whiskey. I can't call that drinking. Maybe Boris Johnson's the same. It's only six figures, that's not being paid. But the point here is that Boris Johnson lied about being paid for the meeting. Now, okay, he lied. Does it matter? He lies all the time. Is a former Prime Minister not allowed to be paid for meetings? Well, it depends. They can trade on the fact they've been in office, of course. Nothing wrong with being paid for speeches or writing books about their time as Prime Minister, as long as they don't breach the Official Secrets Act. But they're not allowed to profit from any contacts they made in office, and they're not allowed to use public money to personally profit. As a former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson is allowed to draw on public funding, even to this day, to run an office of staff to manage his public duties. Now, a former Prime Minister doesn't have to have public duties, they can do what they like, but some continue to promote causes they care about, and they are allowed publicly funded staff to manage engagements. But they are not allowed to use that taxpayer-funded office to manage their private business. They have to keep it separate. And according to The Guardian, who've seen this treasure trove of leaked documents, it looks like Johnson has been using those staff for his personal business. There's also evidence that he set up meetings while he was Prime Minister itself, which were being kept secret as well, including an illegal lockdown lunch with the person who paid for his lavish flat refurbishment. Interestingly, the articles do mention that when ACOBA were interviewing Johnson about his arrangement, which is the group which makes sure ministers do not act improperly after leaving office, the chair, who's a Tory himself, said that he didn't believe Boris Johnson was being honest with him. I guess it's the old telltale sign, isn't it? How do you tell when Boris Johnson's lying? His lips move. In other details, Johnson had a secret meeting with Peter Thiel just before handing in the contract for the NHS. We're stuck with that now. For Labour to go with someone else for upgrades would hold back the NHS by years, which Labour cannot afford to do, especially with polling as it is. Now, if that contract had been awarded properly, it would just be one of those things. But if it were awarded properly, why the secrecy? Why did we need a document dump leak to find out about the meeting? Did Boris Johnson award the contract corruptly? Another section suggests Johnson lobbied the Saudi government whilst he was Prime Minister for commercial gain. These are just the initial snippets as well. The Guardian has published multiple articles today, but they wouldn't have just dumped everything out in one go. You portion it out, right? So you would imagine there's more to come. You would even imagine they're still going through the data dump. And Labour could use this, not just politically, but actually to fix the system. The fact that David Cameron was found not guilty, but the Treasury said that that's because the rules are shit, that gives Labour all the reason they need to launch a commission to toughen the rules up. But this Boris Johnson scandal does more. It means there is reason to not just toughen the rules up, but the enforcement as well. This leak shows Johnson has broken the rules. Now, there should be an investigation, of course, but what will be the outcome? Even if it says, yeah, he broke the rules, what's going to happen to him? Is he just going to be reminded of his responsibilities? Don't you do it again? No, this should be like tax evasion. You pay the illicit money to the Treasury, plus a fine on top. Boris Johnson should be made to pay to the Treasury all of the dodgy money he received, plus a percentage on top as a fine, like Nadim Zahawi with his tax evasion, right? And Labour could properly lean into this. They have demonstrated that they are holding their ministers to ridiculously high standards. Rayner resigned. Why? Because she didn't understand complex trust rules. Well, almost nobody does. Haig resigned because of a mistake she made in her 20s, even if you think she acted maliciously at the time. Not something to block your access to a ministerial career years later. 2 Labour women had to resign over stupid shit that nobody could call corruption in office, had nothing to do with their public office. Yet, we've had 2 Tory Etonian men abuse their public position, and maybe even public money, to maliciously, deliberately profit. There's no accident here. David Cameron didn't accidentally use his contacts in the Tory party to get preferential access for his employer. Boris Johnson didn't accidentally say he wasn't paid for the Maduro meeting when he'd been given £200,000 for it. That's the real two-tier justice. And Labour should go hard on this. Announce a commission to see what needs to be done to tighten up the rules, but also the oversight. Because we shouldn't have to rely on a leaked data like this. So we need proper oversight, proper policing of it, enforcement and punishments. We cannot keep having a situation whereby Labour ministers have to resign for using the wrong fork at dinner, but Tories get away with literally fleecing the country in a vain attempt to satisfy their insatiable greed. And although the main motivation will be to show the public that actually some governments can do the right thing for the right reasons, it wouldn't hurt that it could end up distracting from the shit show that the deputy leadership contest may become. This is a gift to Labour and they should absolutely unwrap it with all haste. But let me know what you think in the comments below. For more content, you can subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.